Well, welcome to another episode of the Grazing Sheep Podcast. I'm your host, Big Tom Perkins, along with Dr. Cameron Meyerly. And we're getting excited because Thanksgiving's coming up. And if you've seen Cameron or I, you know we like to eat.
It's true. That is probably one of my favorite holidays, just from the dining aspect of what's involved. So,
Yeah, and
yeah, definitely a favorite.
since I'm a good 30 some years older than you are, I've got a lot more Thanksgiving dinners under my belt. Well, they're kind of hanging out over my belt now, actually.
Right. Right. I'm not too terribly far behind you, Tom, unfortunately. But do you have any family tradition or Thanksgiving dishes that are just a mainstay for you?
Nope. None of my family lives close by, so I just go over to friends' houses. And
Nice.
I've got one friend that I've gone to his house for years for Thanksgiving, and so I get to hang out there. And he has a farm. He doesn't understand why I have sheep, and
Right.
and this whole grazing thing makes no sense to him whatsoever. Then he has a
So I gotta
brother-in-law
ask.
that's a state senator here in Pennsylvania, and he heads up all the ag kind of policies and bills and stuff like that that they try to get passed through the states. It's always fun talking to him.
That would be interesting for sure. Are there any side dishes, I should say, that over your many Thanksgivings that you've said, oh, that's different, but I don't mind it? It was surprisingly good.
Well, they have a lot of vegetables there, and everybody knows I don't like vegetables, so I always sit there and just kind of pass them along, and then I say, "Boy, those green beans were really good." And everybody looks at me, and I say, "Look, I cleaned them all up. You can't even see them anymore." Yeah. So,
Nice.
the big thing is pie, because I'm a
Yeah. Any
connoisseur. I'm pretty picky when it comes to my pie. There's only two kinds of pie that I like, and that's cold pie and warm pie.
right. Right. Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. Pretty easy to decipher at that point.
Yep, I'm just a big fan of turkey and mashed potatoes and gravy. And when you're a single guy, you don't eat mashed potatoes very often, so that's a big deal to me.
The mashed potatoes.
Yep,
To be honest, not a big turkey fan.
really.
It'll be there. It'll be there, but it and I'll probably eat a piece, but it will be the only time, unless it's lunch meat. It'll be the only time I eat a piece of hot turkey,
Yeah,
365, all year round.
yeah, it's
So
pretty close to the only time that I eat it. I usually get sent home with some leftovers, so I'll eat it for a few meals, and then it'll be gone, and I won't have it again until the following year. But
yeah. Yeah, you probably ought to be having a leg of lamb, number of lambs you've been sending off to freezer camp.
well, I probably could, but I'm not going to share that with anybody. It's too good.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. I know that is a something that was brought up at a recent educational event. Uh, the lady had mentioned that she makes rack for uh, rack of lamb for Christmas, and her comment was, she's like, "I've got some big relatives, some big nephews, and it's expensive. There's there's a lot of lamb that they'll consume just on their own, let alone when you get them all together. So
Yeah.
I can't blame you for keeping it to yourself.
So the other
But
big
yeah,
milestone is when we first started doing this podcast, we kind of dreamt of the day that we'd hit 35,000 plays. And we thought we'd be lucky if that happened by the first of the year. And it happened the week before Thanksgiving. We're pretty
it
grateful
did.
for
We
that.
are thankful for that. Yeah,
Yeah.
and certainly we should say a thank you to those that have listened from the beginning, those that are going to listen to this in the future after this episode comes out. It's something, again, I take very little credit uh, for the podcast as a whole. It's something that was Tom's brainchild, and you've probably heard from previous episodes, or you will hear that something that he wanted to pursue, and we were already talking once a week in that extension role, because if you haven't figured out by now, Tom's got a lot of questions, and just not understanding a situation is not acceptable. And that's something I'm thankful for about Tom. And so if it wasn't for Tom and slaving over the computer and the sound on this on a weekly basis, that was the biggest thing is, can we keep it consistent? And it's something, honestly, I look forward to every week now, coming up with something, and hopefully you guys look forward to listening to it every week. So it's something we really enjoyed doing. And I don't know, Tom, you think we keep on moving forward with it?
Oh, I think so. This will be the final episode of season 2, and you probably don't even notice the difference between season 1 and season 2 because we didn't take any break. We just continued on through.
Yep, and it's just an arbitrary break. It's 20 episodes, correct?
Yep, 20 episodes. We just call it a different season.
Yeah,
so if we wanted to take
that's
some
all it
time
is.
off, we could. We just haven't done so yet.
Right. That is the crazy thing, though, when you think this started back in March of 23.
Yeah.
we don't even have 12 months under our belt. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun to look back over and listen to these, and certainly all the guest speakers that we've had have been wonderful. And I guess thank you goes out to those guys as well.
Absolutely.
And we're looking forward to having some more here across over the winter, some more in-depth topics, and should be good. Like I said, we're going to keep plugging away.
Absolutely. So I know at the conclusion of season 1, we went back and picked up some questions from our listeners. And so we kind of thought we'd continue that tradition. And so are you ready to answer questions from listeners?
Maybe. We'll see.
You never know.
You never know. And I haven't seen the questions you have, and I don't know that you've seen the questions that I've got. So,
well, it's so I get this one a lot. So how long should paddocks be rested before grazing again?
Well, there's an episode in and of itself, and then we'll have to do another episode for the rest of the questions.
Yeah, to me, it all depends what you're trying to do, what time of year it is. But if you're just looking at the grass, you want those tips on that grass to be fully formed back to a point. And you want a minimum of 3 blades of grass on that grass plant. If you're looking at it from parasites, pretty much the longer the better. The longer you can rest that, the better off you are. And most of the time for the grass to pretty much heal itself and be ready to go, you're in that 30 to 35 days when things are growing pretty good. You can be in the beginning of the grazing season, you can be down as much as 15 days, and that will occur. But I tend to look at it more from the parasite side, so I'm looking at a minimum of 45, 60 days would be better. Most of ours are 90 days and greater.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to your first statement of it depends what you're trying to accomplish and the environment in which you're trying to apply this rest period. Mm-hmm. And so whether it's a regional environment or even the growing season versus a more dormant season environment. Yep. So it's a loaded question and probably need more detail, and we could break it up. What's our rest period look like in the heart of the growing season or during that spring flush? What's our rest period look like in a dormant season or in that winter kind of stockpile grazing? And so it really, the reason I mentioned there goes the episode, it's tied up in this one question is because it unfolds into just a maze of different rabbit holes to go down, which is fun. I think it's a wonderful question. I think where we start is how frequent are we moving in the first place? Mm-hmm. And so ideally, kind of that 5, my opinion, that 5 day, I don't want to be longer than that, especially in the growing season state. And the reason a lot of people have weighed in on this, the reason I don't want to go more than 5, like in Tom's situation, if it works to move every day, great. You can do it every 3 days, fine. But that 5-day, when we're thinking about when grass begins to regrow, we really are looking at that kind of that 5-day window on average, because the goal is for, as Tom mentioned, that grass to rest, to have a chance to grow and to come back. And so if we have sheep in there and they're finding that new growth at day 7, 8, 9, 10, what are they choosing to eat?
They're eating that new growth, and you're stunting.
They're eating the new growth on my beneficial forage species.
Yep.
And maybe we get some more trample on those species that are less palatable, but the consumption or the mechanical action of grazing on that new growth is what's going to stunt that plant long term. And that's where, in a continuous system, if we have sheep grazing livestock out there all the time in the same paddock, they're consistently coming back to the same fresh plant, that same palatable plant, and consuming that plant over and over and over again, to the point that other species then can outcompete that plant that's being consumed, that's more palatable, it's being consumed more regularly. So I think if we start there, then we can get into the other avenues of why are we resting in the first place? What are we trying to accomplish through resting that paddock? The kind of duh answer up front is growth, regrowth of the plant. If we have an animal in that paddock and they're consuming forage, they're going to keep consuming forage until there's nothing left, and it's only new growth that they're consuming. So that's item number 1, is we want regrowth. And if we're thinking about what it takes in that growing season, what would you say, Tom, in your experience, you've seen plant regrowth to get back to a, say, minimum grazing height of 12, 18 inches, kind of that prime, palatable young forage? How long from the day you pull animals out to the time it hits that 12, 18 inches of forage?
Early in the spring,
these,
that can happen as quick as 2 weeks.
Right.
It can happen crazy fast. There's
2 weeks
there's a second question that talks about stocking rate, and
okay,
and they're talking about they're running 5 ewes or more per acre. And they just can't understand how you can get those rest periods when you're doing that. And it goes back to this same thing that I talk about, moving sheep every single day, is because you can put them in such a much smaller area, and you can still get that room and fill, and then you move them to that next spot the next day, and that starts to give you 1 day rest in the spot you're in.
Yeah, and it's not an automatic.
So instead of running sheep, X number of sheep on 1 acre, if you can take that 1 acre and you can divide that into 4 or 5, that means where you graze the first day, by the time you get to the end of that, you've got 4 or 5 days rest on that first spot that you grazed. And what's crazy is, the more you do this, the more grass will grow there. You can increase your stocking rates because you'll have more grass growing.
Right. And part of that, the reason for that, it's not just this magical, the ground knows that there's more animals out there, so it has to produce more feed. But when we're thinking about how nutrients are then dispersed more evenly across that paddock, and those nutrients are then made available, or nutrients from the grass are consumed by the animal and then made into an available into an available form, an available form for the plant to use right away. Right. And so it completes that cycle, boosting that regrowth, and then also making sure that we're operating close to a kind of net zero removal of
Mhm.
nutrients. It's a lot slower, I should say, because we are burning energy. That animal's burning energy. Not we can't return 100% back onto that ground, but what we're losing is much lower than say taking and cutting a hay off and removing that forage off completely. But I think it's also it's a good question, that 5 ewes per acre stocking density or stocking rate, and those are two different things. Maybe we can
Yep.
get into that here in a little bit, but yeah, I remember a gentleman when I was in undergrad in a sheep production course had mentioned, well, in Ohio we should be anywhere from 5 to 10 ewes per acre stocking rate, and I remember thinking, I was like, man, 10 ewes per acre is cruising. And I think it's doable in the right setting, but we also have to take into account production of the ground. So just because Tom's running 5 ewes per acre, uh, and I'm running say 8 ewes per acre, it doesn't mean that somebody else takes over. And I think, Tom, you're the classic example of dealing with some soils that traditionally have been underperforming to what we would hope, or they're much more productive now. But it was strip mine ground that needed reclaimed.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've been building productivity back into that soil. And so day one, when you started grazing, especially in the fashion you're grazing in now, you weren't at 5 ewes per
Mm-hmm.
acre.
Right.
Maybe the ground could handle 2 ewes per acre from a productivity standpoint. It's just like if I go to make hay, and the reason I bring this up is because it's in a tangible amount, a tangible weight. So if I
Mm-hmm.
go to Tom's farm and I want to make hay on 10 acres and I end up with 2 ton to the acre across 3 cuttings, and then I go to a gentleman down the road uh, and make hay on his ground and I get 3 ton per acre on 3 cuttings. That's I'm going to get a different number of bales out of that. Is probably the best analogy to pull from that. Um, it's just what our ground is going to produce for us in that forage material. So just because you move to a rotational system doesn't mean that automatically, oh, I can handle more animals. We're not immediately improving forage productivity.
No, it
We
takes
are
time.
improving utilization though,
Yeah.
and that's where we can see some immediate improvement. But do you know what your stocking rate is currently there on the farm?
No, I don't pay any attention to it.
Okay, okay,
I
yeah.
really
I mean,
don't.
we're at, and I think part of it is, that I go back to that memory of what I learned in that course, in that 5 to 8 or 5 to 10 range. And it's like, well, let's see how much, if I can produce more on the same number of acres, I should be better off. That's
Mm-hmm.
the hope. And so I think I had mentioned to you this year, Tom, we were up around 8 ewes per acre,
Mm-hmm.
and was very open that we were overstocked. And
Yeah.
so our rest periods were much lower than what I wanted them to be. But I think our sheep look better than they ever had, and especially those that had parasite resistance that we've been selecting for. You can sort out the good from the bad pretty quickly, and fortunately that the proportion of those two, there were very few that couldn't handle it, but it was very much a trial by fire. And but our rest periods were probably around that 28 to 35 day mark.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, but again, we're trying to do some other things off the farm, and um, know we need to maximize the space we have right now, currently. And
Yeah.
that's
In your situation, you're overstocked. My situation, I'm still probably understocked. But the entire time I'm grazing all summer long, all I'm thinking about is, or one of the things I'm thinking about is how far through the winter can I graze?
Right.
And so
And
I don't want to
that's
be.
the big question.
I don't want to be. It's not about how many can you graze in the summer. It's how many can you graze through the winter.
Right.
If you
And
don't
the
want to
hard
be
thing
buying, if you
too,
don't want to be buying a whole bunch of hay, then you better be thinking that direction. So we
yeah,
move on here, though.
yeah, we certainly can.
I had another fellow. I have no idea how you say this name.
Oh
It's
boy.
Korsvejgaard, Korsvejgaard, flock and fiber. So anyhow, he wanted to know. He said they raise Shetland sheep, and while there's been some interest in some corners of the breed in joining NSIP, there's been a lot of pushback against it, as Shetlands are still considered to be unimproved. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on how one might develop a primitive breed focused EVVs. All
Yeah,
I
that's
can
a good
think about
question.
is data. You're going to have to collect data.
Yeah, I think the big question. This is certainly a Rusty question. I
Hmm.
don't want to speak on Rusty's behalf, but I think his idea behind this is we need sheep in there.
Yeah.
For the Shetland breed, if you're moving forward and you want to make progress, this is a tool to assist the breed and breeders in making improvement. And what was the term he used? They're an unimproved breed.
Yeah.
So I have a hard time with that term, only because probably because I'm not a Shetland producer, and it probably means something that I something different than how I'm taking it. But my thought is, when I think of unimproved, it goes back to a natural selection model.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming maybe not everybody within the breed, again, like shocker, I'm not a Shetland producer here, but um, we're making selection in those sheep, whether it's for fiber color, um, for conformation, whatever the item is, we're already seeing human selection, human genetic selection, or the human impact on genetic selection in that breed. And so NSIP, I believe, is just adding an additional tool to improve accuracy in selecting for those certain traits that are listed. And I think, to your point, Tom, the first step in pursuing this is submitting data,
Yeah.
getting a group of producers enrolled, and making the commitment to submitting that data year after year to get that connectivity and to really analyze, to get a data set worth really analyzing over time. And this is
And doesn't
like
NSIP have like fiber data as well?
they do, and that really ties back to micron
Yeah.
measurements. So
Mhm.
the diameter of that fleece, of that wool fiber. And so that could certainly be a part of it. Again, I'm not trying to offend anybody with Shetlands, but I don't know that micron selection is really in that what they're after. I've cheered for a couple of Shetland producers, and there's more emphasis on color. The nice thing is that's a visual, easy to measure trait. So I don't
Mhm.
need NSIP to assist me with color of the fleece. But if I wanted some maternal data or growth data, there are certainly areas to improve on the breed without selecting for detrimental traits in the breed. And I've heard that argument before, which is always interesting to me. That, well, if we get data on these sheep and people start selecting sheep based on numbers, we're going to lose all the integrity of the breed, of
Mhm.
what it is and what we've come to know it to be. And I think you can certainly do that. It's certainly possible, but you can do that with visual selection for phenotype. We can ruin sheep. So my thought is, if you're trying to improve productivity and keep everything in check that I can control or select for visually, then that's what I'm going to pursue to make them a more economically relevant breed, or at least my flock should improve economically, I would hope. But yeah, it's a great question, and I think it would be hard to make that jump. I know at WVU when we were, and they still do carry out the buck test. They sample, I want to say they had like 260 or 280. It was a pile of goats, mostly Kiko, and I think every year Dr. Bowdrich has given a talk on enrolling these goats in NSIP because they're selecting for parasite resistance without the selection metric of a fecal egg count EBV.
Yeah.
And so the data, a lot of the data they already have, but the biggest fear is that people are going to cheat and submit false data on progeny. And it's hard for producers to hear that, well, they'll get caught in a couple years when progeny are not performing to the level in which they're expected to. And people want justice right away. So it's a hard thing to preach, but yeah, that's a super question. Really like that question.
So we have another question from Richie Perkins. And I have no idea.
Tom's alias.
I'd like to have a conversation with Richie.
If you're going to bring in your own questions, Tom, at least change the last name.
No, it's not. It's just, it can't, because it starts out, "Hey, Tom."
Okay. Okay. Nice.
It said, "What lab should I have done for biotesting my registered sheep?"
Oh boy, this is good. Whole can of worms on these questions. So, Tom, are you sampling anything right now for I'm assuming he's talking like a biosecurity panel?
That's what I took from it. So
okay.
I emailed him back and I said, everything I see, people are testing for Yonis, CL, and OPP. I think that's right.
It's pretty standard, and I think along with that, you'll get your codon 171, your scrapie resistance. That's I'm trying to remember. I know the lab, everybody calls it Waddles. So it's the Washington Animal Disease and Diagnostic Laboratory. And that's in Washington State, not DC. But they have a biosecurity panel. And so I want to say it's $30 a sample submitted via TSU collection vial or blood vial. And you might even be able to send in a blood card. I don't have it in front of me, but they would have all that information on the website. And you pay that $30, or it's somewhere in that ballpark, and they would test for all of the items that you had just brought up. And so this is whether the animal has it right now or not, not whether it's resistant to it.
Okay.
And that's where, so there's kind of two answers here. So that's that biosecurity, that's testing whether it's an animal you're buying or an animal that maybe you're suspect of a problem. And there's also some resistance markers that we know we have through genomic testing. And that's not in all breeds, but a select few at this point. And those are looking at OPP. So those are marked, I believe, T. Homozygous T is the marker for OPP resistance. And we have our QQ, our QR, and our RRs, and I think genetic parameters or disease parameters in there is what those are listed under. Again, I'm not super familiar on that side of it either, but another one of the advantages to finding and selecting through genomics.
Yep.
But yeah, that biosecurity panel, gets pricey if you're going to do the whole flock. It's an investment on the producer side of things, and uh, it, my thought is just off the cuff is if I'm going to invest that kind of money up front, you will never see my sheep at a sale or a show, or
Yeah.
I have a hard time bringing sheep back to the farm because if I happen to bring something, and certainly we test those animals and quarantine them and everything else, uh, but the investment up front is significant, and so I want to guard that investment and probably move towards a closed flock long
That's very
term.
true. So that was all the questions I have. We have time for maybe one quick question if you've got one.
Yeah. So the only question I had that I feel like we have a lot of them came in earlier and we're in the summer and I feel relevant for the grazing season.
Yeah.
But I did have a question here earlier this fall and had already answered it, but we'll go ahead and share it. And that was as we start to kind of identify areas that need renovation. And this was following an episode that the individual had listened to where we had talked about rejuvenating or completely renovating. How do you make that determination on what pastures you're going to try to fix, and when you know you're going to fix them, kind of what's your plan of action?
Well, I think we all have that one pasture that we just wish was better. So, I don't know if I'll ever hit a day where I'll say all my pastures are perfect. I don't want to change any of them.
Right.
I don't think that'll ever happen. But I, I read this book a few years ago by Dale Strickler, I believe is his name. It was called The Drought Resistant Farm or something of that nature. But in there, he talked about renovating pasture. And he said, this is the time to go in and do all the things you swear you'd never do to a pasture. You can go in and tillage, which we all know is terrible to do. And this is the time to go do it. And if you've got a bunch of stuff you need to kill, go in there and spray it. Just put the glyphosate to it with the idea that you're going to do these things once in your lifetime and you're never going to do them again. Now, I think that is the time to do it. Go in and do all the things you said you were never going to do to a pasture field. Go in, do the tillage if you need to smooth it up, because you don't want to be clumping through ruts the rest of your life. Go ahead and spray, get everything killed out of there that you want killed out of there. You want to play around with a cover crop for a couple of seasons just to kind of give that some more time for those weeds to pop up through so you can go back through and get those things killed. And if you're ever going to apply fertilizer, it's a perfect time to do it. Then you go in and come up with whatever seed mix you want to put in there. And now you should never have to do anything else to that pasture again if you properly manage that pasture.
Yeah. And I think
when I read that, to me, it was like, okay, here's a guy that really gets the whole regenerative thing. And he's like, yep, you're going to sin big one time, and you should never have to do this again.
Right. And you're talking about all these negative things, in implementing them at this one time point. We want to make sure we do it right.
Yep.
Because there's nothing worse than renovating a pasture to come back in 5 years and say, well, this is all, pugged up, or yep. I need to go and do something different to this because I know the investment I made 5 years ago to fix this. And I think it does give you some sense of responsibility on how you care for that ground after, because you know what the investment was, whether it's both not just money, but time in fixing it. So I would agree with you 100%, fix that item. The other thing is all these things that we're considering as bad management. If something needs fixed, or my opinion is if I have poor performing ground, but I'm more worried about soil biology. It doesn't matter if my soil biology is perfect,
Yeah,
or I assume it's perfect. If my ground is not performing and I can't feed livestock on the acreage that I'm so afraid to touch, then what good is it doing me anyway?
that's exactly it. Yeah, I think it's
So
a perfect time to do it. Um, you can't assign blame as to why, you know, I mean, I've got fields that have tractor ruts in it. I look back on it now and I say, what in the world was I doing it? You doing running a tractor across that? Back at the
you're
time,
right.
it's like this is the only time I have to do it now. And that's why, there's a rut there.
Yep.
Um
And now you have to go back and spend how much more time to
fix
fix
it.
it?
Yep.
Yep.
Yep. And now, we don't have a reason to take tractors across pasture fields, so we just don't do it.
Right.
I just spread some compost this week. The ground was nice and dry. I didn't have to worry about compacting soils or causing a rut. You know, now I can kind of just wait and do it when I need to do it, kind of thing. So, well, we're coming up on our time. It's been good catching up with you. It's been good, going over some of these listener questions, and so we'll see you after Thanksgiving. So you have a happy Thanksgiving. All our listeners, we wish the same for you. We'll catch you
Perfect.
later.
You do the same, Tom, and try to get some rest.
Yeah, I'll need rest after I'm done eating.
I, right.
All right. So we thank you for listening. Just remember you can reach me at bigtomperkins@gmail.com. There's a Facebook page. You can go on there and like and follow. You can put some comments on that page or even some questions that you have. So, like I say, it's been good catching up with you and happy Thanksgiving to all of you. So we'll talk to you later. Bye.